I'm dressed in this great big coat because it's cold in my house. It's cold outside, but it's cold in my house because I don't have any central heating. And although I live in a terrace house, just a simple, humble 2 up, 2 down, and there's houses either side of me, because the windows aren't terribly efficient, it still gets very cold in here. And you may know what it's like if you've turned your central heating off. Now, I'm not moaning about this because I choose to live this way. I have a wood-burning stove in the kitchen, and I have a wood-burning stove in my front room, and that's the sort of basic heating. And when they're both on, the heat does permeate enough. I spend most of my time downstairs, or if I'm in the studio where I conduct my interviews, I tend to sort of put in an LPG little gas fire just to warm the place up for the duration that I'm in there. Now, I choose to live that way, so I'm definitely not moaning about it. And very shortly, I shall go and light my fires. But there's a lot of people who, of course, have no choice but to turn their heating down or off because they're worried about the cost of the fuel, and they're making that decision whether they can heat or eat, and whether they're able to keep enough heat going for perhaps their children. And it doesn't help, here we are in the 21st century, at the top of our game as a human being, you would think, and especially in the West, in which we seem to have solved so many problems, and yet we seem to be in the worst situation possible, with a government that is penalising us and putting forward tyrannical policies which seem to be there to make our life a misery. And somehow, for one reason or another, we keep voting them back in. And there they go every 5 years or so with their begging bowl, telling us they're going to improve things and then somehow making it all worse. And instead of helping people, which they could do, they seem to be actually going against people with their dehumanised policies. I don't know if you've noticed that. And I'm one of those people who's been at the front end of this, where I drove into a place that I didn't know had a clean air zone, and the next minute I know there's a bloke knocking at the door, and it's putting the fear of God into me that he might take my van away and then try and extract money at me with menaces. And many people are in this situation, or they've fallen behind with the council tax, which is a demand, and there's no negotiation on it, or very limited on how you can pay it. And in this day and age in which everything seems to cost an absolute fortune, what are we supposed to do? We thought that society was here for us as humans, that we could work things out and make things the best. But it turns out that actually that these people have managed to incorporate businesses, the councils and even the government, and all they're here to do is extract money from us every which way. This is not the way that you or I really envisaged how life would be in the 21st century. There is a way, of course, that we could get rid of all of this, and that is the very simple rule of law. And if we had proper law, common law, if we had trial by jury, in which if you have a problem and somebody takes you to court, or you want to take somebody else to court, then you would have trial by jury. I mean, firstly, you would have where's the crime, where's the victim situation. But even if you have a civil dispute, wouldn't it be much better to be heard instead of by one person, but a number of your peers who can actually not only think about what the situation that you're in and why you're unable to pay a certain fine, but whether that fine actually should be there in the first place. Is it helping humanity or is it hindering? And a trial by jury in which members of your peers gather together and listen, then I think that we would be solving so many of these problems instead of what the corporate Britain wants to achieve, or what third-party companies that work with the government, or think tanks that meet in Davos and decide they want some form of one world government in which we're all going to be enslaved. We have to have our biometrics taken. Everything is moved online, so we need a digital identity in order to access anything, and our lives are made a misery if we don't acquiesce to any of that. But a trial by jury, we the people would be starting to make the decisions, not only in offences, but in the rules. Is that useful, that rule to us? Can it be adapted? Should it be changed? Is it capturing people? Is it hurting people? Are people living in fear? This is something that could very easily be rolled out, and so many of the problems that we see would be ironed out and actually changed. And people like the Prime Minister, the Cabinet Office, the Houses of Parliament, our MPs would equally be up there in front of the judge, which would be those 12 just men, not a convener who's sitting in the top of the judge with his wig on. He would just be there to make sure and facilitate that everybody's there and it goes in the correct order. But the judge is the jury, and they're listening not only to the complaint but to the rule that has supposedly been broken. And is that rule, as I say, something that is actually worth having in the first place? Now, the argument is at the moment we've been so dumbed down with all this wokeism and various different opinions and been atomized into different racial groups and things like that, that actually people, that you can't trust the ordinary everyday people, that our peers, because they'll come with a whole load of baggage. And I absolutely agree that we might find that there is a lot of dispute about what people actually want, because our society has been corrupted so much. And so therefore, possibly what we would need is a system in which people undergo some kind of training or explanation about how a jury ought to work. Basically worked on fairness. What is fair? What is right? Some of us, I think, have forgotten what is right and what is wrong. We intrinsically know that, but the powers that want to remain in power, those people have managed to somehow turn us so that we're arguing amongst each other, that if you hold an opinion and you disagree with that opinion, you're somehow now an idiot, that people can call you names, or you have one opinion about one thing and everything else is an agreement. But because you just differ from perhaps the big narrative that everyone is, the official narrative that everyone is supposed to be part of, then you're deemed as somehow inferior or not worthy of talking to, which is a nonsense. We all have our own opinions. I have mine, you have yours. The ability to be able to listen to somebody else's opinion, to be able to consider somebody else's opinion, to place your feet in somebody else's shoes and see it from a different perspective than your own, is absolutely most important. Even if at the end of that process you say, well, actually, I still can't quite understand why you think that way, but at least you've experienced the other person's thought processes and taken on board, rather than just shutting down the argument. So maybe that is something that would need to be, that people just need to have a period of time to understand again and familiarise themselves with generally what is right and what is wrong, and actually just reacquaint themselves with their true feelings. Because as I say, I think we all genuinely know intrinsically in our heart what is right and what is wrong, and you would be taking that into the court and then into the jury to be arguing with or debating with your fellow man, the 12 just men and women, and saying, well, actually, I think that this bit is right and I think that law is wrong, whatever it is. Now, you may say, but they'll never do this, and maybe they won't unless we actually demand it. If we demand every time that we have a court summons and say, well, actually, I'm happy to come to court and make a plea or defend myself, but I want a proper trial by jury. Not a jury trial, that's a completely different thing. A jury trial is, again, where you just have one judge or possibly a couple of judges, and the jury may come up with a verdict, but the judge is then only going by the complaint, not by the rule that was broken, and he is then deciding what the punishment should be. We don't want that. The 12 men of your peers, of your area, they're the people, women as well, they are the ones that should be making the decision and deciding whether there is even a punishment at all, or whether the rule of law needs to be changed, or the legislation as it often is. And I think that that is something that we ought to be demanding every time you have a complaint. Say, well, I'm happy to solve this, even if it is somebody like the bailiffs banging on the door. And you say, well, look, I want this to go to a trial by jury to thrash it out, because it may well be that what you're doing is unlawful. And actually the thing that I broke driving through a ULEZ zone, and there's no signs, there's no notification, and you're demanding by threats and menaces, maybe that's not the best way for humanity to live. After all, we put all these things into operation for our benefit. That's really what they should be, not for our detrimental health and having us worry and peering out the window and wondering if somebody's going to come and bang on the door and demand money, when we all ought to be thriving and enjoying life. Here we are, as I say, in the 21st century, and yet we seem to be under the thumb rather than enjoying everything. And that's what we ought to be doing. And trial by jury, to me, is the key way to eradicate all these unfair rules. And so I would say, absolutely, we should be demanding this and telling our MPs at every opportunity, this is what we want. This is how democracy works. You seem to have forgotten. You seem to think that you are our masters or represent the masters in the House, but actually we are the masters and we're paying all the bills. So thank you very much, we'll have it. Now the answer might come back to you that's saying, but we can't possibly afford this. There's thousands of people who default on payments. They need to go to a magistrate's court. We can't possibly have, we don't have enough magistrates. We don't have enough time in the courts. We don't have enough public buildings to do all this. And my answer would be, of course, you seem to manage to find money to pay for wars in which you're going across to other countries and killing people, men, women and children, and they're not actually coming over here to beat us up and battle us, but somehow we're contributing to wars all over the place and spending absolute fortunes, which it turns out, as you've seen the interview that I did with Clive Coverdale, the other day, Chris Coverdale the other day, you'll notice that, of course, that is actually against the legislation and the UN Charter that we've all signed, or our governments have signed. It's not what we want to go to war. Who actually, in the end, really wants to go to war other than those people who are lending the money on both sides so that either way they get money back, and the politicians who decide we're going to wage war, and it's not the people, and it's probably most unlikely the soldiers who really want to go to war. Yet they can find money for that, but for the money for humanitarian aid and making our lives much better, such as trial by jury, somehow or other, miraculously, and I can't understand why, they won't do it. They won't find it. And why? I cannot think of any other reason that they could say trial by jury. No, it's an unfair system. How can it be unfair? It's our land. We're the ones paying for this. There's more of us than them. We should be demanding this. This is our right as human beings, as men and women of this world. We should be demanding systems which are there for our benefit rather than for theirs. Just an opinion, you may disagree. And now I'm going to go and light my fire and try and keep a little warmer.